Right, so one of the most impactful events, especially in crypto, is coming up. The Bitcoin halving event on the 19th of April, 2024. Right now, at the time of recording, it's 29th of February. We've almost hit all-time highs on Bitcoin. That's why I feel like it's relevant to make this type of video right now. Obviously, to prepare ourselves, we're going to be looking at what we've seen in the past from these halving events and essentially where we can see price heading towards. Obviously, my full-time occupation is a forex trader, but I do delve into the crypto industry from time to time when I do see a good opportunity, hence why I'm making this video. So in terms of beginner stages, and for those of you that don't know too much about the event and what's actually going to be happening, roughly every 4 years, the amount of new Bitcoins created gets cut in half. So essentially, the miners that are working on producing these Bitcoins are rewarded 50% less every time this halving happens. Essentially, what that does is it puts a little strain on supply. And of course, when we do think about the use of Bitcoin, the demand is only increasing. So as supply is decreasing, demand is increasing. We can only expect for price to increase. Of course, this cannot be expected straight away, and we're going to be getting into the charts to see what we can expect in terms of price. But over time, we're going to be seeing what happens. Now, in terms of the halving reward per block, essentially these miners work on blocks and they are rewarded these Bitcoins as a transaction for their time, essentially. Now, we have had a few halving events so far. The first one that did happen was in 2012, the second in 2016, 2020, and then now 2024 is the one that's up and coming. In terms of the reward, they started off by receiving 50 Bitcoin for every piece of work that they would do. That was eventually reduced down to 25, to 12.5, 6.25, and now even more and more. This is obviously going to continue up until a certain point. I believe it's up until 2105 or 2104 that the last halving date is going to happen. And obviously at that point, the industry, we are going to know the supply that's in the market. And obviously at that point, it's a lot easier to understand where Bitcoin is heading and stuff. But obviously that's very much into the future. Right now, essentially what we're going to be seeing is we're anticipating that this Bitcoin halving event is going to happen. Now, why is it so essential to obviously look at this event? Just pretty much looking at the halving events over here, as you can see, the general trend of what usually happens in the next 18 months afterwards is that there's a bull market. At the moment, as you can see, especially in current price right now, we are pretty much experiencing quite an aggressive bull market, especially right now. We're obviously going to be getting into the details of why that is and what we can expect from it. But for now, just understand that every time the halving event happens, supply decreases, or the supply of new Bitcoin being created decreases, and essentially that increases the price over time. As you can see every single time over here, once in 2012, once in 2016, and then obviously 2020 is what's happened. This one is an old chart just taken from Google, so this is pretty much pre-2020 and what they were expecting. And as you can see over here, pretty much what they were expecting, some kind of accumulation and then eventually distribution into the bull market. Now, the difference this time, what do we actually see in the market? Now, just having a quick little look, as you can see over here, every time there's been an accumulation before the halving event, it's been sort of quite muted, you could say. The difference this time is that Bitcoin ETFs have been approved. Essentially, what that means is this. Bitcoin ETFs are basically exchange traded funds that can be traded on certain stock exchanges, such as traditional ETFs. Essentially, what the difference is that you can officially trade these shares now. You can trade an ETF, so you can trade Bitcoin as an ETF, and now it makes it a lot more accessible to the public. This really is good news for Bitcoin in a way, and obviously the whole crypto industry. Hence why, since we have received the news, we have been seeing a bit of a bull market, especially in the last month. If we do continue in this direction, this might potentially be one of the most aggressive months or bullish months that we've seen since the start of Bitcoin in a way. Now, there are going to be a few things that I'm going to be talking about over here. And essentially, it's looking at the trends. What have we seen in the past? And what can we actually see potentially at price right now? One thing I do want to know before we get into everything, there is something called as a fear and greed index. This is something that as a crypto investor, you do refer to from time to time. Obviously, I do have quite a few friends in the industry that have been in it for a while, and this is something that they do look at. Essentially, what it is an indicator that shows what the market sentiment is. When we are sort of ranging very low on this spectrum, that means that the market is pretty much dead. Lots of people have just been selling their coins and everything, and prices essentially bottomed out. I'm going to be showing a few examples. Then we've got this orange sector, which essentially prices, people are starting to get, a bit more optimism and, hope that price can actually continue upwards and that Bitcoin is going to be moving. Again, over here, this is where we start to see some of the gains, especially recently. As soon as we get into this last and final sector for the market sentiment, that's when extreme greed starts to happen. Again, what do we expect when extreme greed does happen? Most of the people that have been in their crypto investments until that point, essentially they'll be taking a lot of their take profits. So the way I like to describe it is, it's best to accumulate during this range. So from the 0 to the 25 mark, from the 25 to the 50, keep on investing just bit by bit. And then essentially from the 50 to the 75, it would be good to be getting into, to have most of your portfolio built by that point. And then potentially if there's any nice improvements, you can obviously get in. But at this point, the 75 to the 100, that's when we start to see extreme greed. And essentially, it really is the bull market. Now, as you can see, we really are starting to get into it, especially when looking at price. And so just a quick little side note for those of you that really want to take their trading to the next level. The one thing I always recommend to my students is backtesting and journaling. And the one place I personally use for all of this is Trader Edge. So this software gives you all the access to every single backtesting feature that you need, a whole strategy tester to allow you to put it into different libraries, a calendar, which I believe is actually one of the most essential tools to accurately track your trades and see your progress over time. And one of my personal favorites, the forward testing feature, which allows you to project how a certain strategy will do over time. So if you want to get started with this, click the link in the description to access one of the most trusted backtesting softwares there is available. Now, of course, right now we are on the weekly time frame. And what I've identified over here is pretty much the halving events that we have experienced in the past. So the first one that we talked about was in 2012. In this scenario, I haven't included it just because on Coinbase it doesn't include it. But if we do look at, let's just see any of the other brokers. Let's see if the chart does actually show it. So again, this one, yes, does start from 2012. So we could look at that example as well. But I believe it's just good enough just to look from the 2016 one, because obviously that's when we really started to have a lot of movement from Bitcoin. Now, essentially what we expect is this. And the one thing that I've seen in the market, especially when doing my research on Bitcoin, is whenever we have a halving event, it's always anticipated, right? We know the date of the halving event or the rough estimate of the date, and we can expect what will happen over the next 18 months. And as you can see, whenever the halving event happens, as you can see over here, essentially what price does is it accumulates orders before. So essentially the year before, let's put it out over here. So the year before the halving event, we have lows. So essentially it's a good time to accumulate Bitcoin or crypto in general. Then we have the halving event itself. And essentially with this one, what we get is price starts to slow down and we have some sort of consolidation / more accumulation. And as you can see over here in 2016, as soon as the halving event happens, there was a bit of an expectation before, right? So price started to move upwards. And as soon as the halving event happens, we started to see a bit of a decline. And then eventually, when was this? It happened in July. And then pretty much from October, November time. So let's just say around 6 months afterwards, that's when price really started to increase. And then for the next year or so, that's where price really started to move aggressively. Again, when we look at the last one as well, back in 2020, the same type of thing happened. An accumulation of orders in the previous year. So that's exactly what happened before, as you can see in early 2020. Then as we started to get into it in 2020, more consolidation and accumulation. And then as price started to move over around 6 months afterwards as well, that's where price really was starting to get aggressive. Now, when we look at current price action, something is different here. And the main difference is that the accumulation that we've been seeing into the halving event has been slightly different. The reason is because recently we got one of the biggest pieces of news that we've seen in the whole crypto industry. And that's that Bitcoin ETFs were approved. This is obviously long-term a good thing for Bitcoin and the whole crypto industry in general. So what we got from that pretty much was slightly more accumulation, and then eventually price just really started to, blow up. Again, I did expect this to happen, but not this quickly. And now we are approaching the halving event. It is going to be interesting to see what would actually happen. Now let's talk about the third stage. So we've talked about the halving event. This is pretty much where we get a drop / consolidation, and then it moves. Then we have the 6 months after, which usually is a slow period. And then finally, we have the bull run for the next 18 months after the halving event. Now, this is the final part of the equation. Essentially, the 18 months afterwards is when we get the peak of the market. So as we see over here, back in 2016, we had the halving event. We had that little accumulation of orders just before. We had that consolidation as soon as we had the halving event. And then as you can see, for the next year and a half, let's just see. So that was July. Yeah, so pretty much for the next year and a half, that's where we got the complete peak. And where was the peak? Around 20,000. As soon as we hit that peak for that next 18 months, that's when price really started to reduce and then reach a sustainable level in a way. The next halving event, let's see exactly what happened as well. More consolidation, and then as soon as price started to continue, for the next 18 months, we started to get another peak. This one peaked out at pretty much $70,000. Essentially where we are at this moment in time is just the other day, we almost hit $65,000, so it's just 64K. And now we're just given a little retracement. My opinion on where price can actually go in this little space. So as you can see, we pretty much still have some time to go. Obviously, right now, the current date is the end of February. So we've got all of March and half of April to essentially prepare for the halving event. My opinion, and again, please, this is only for educational purposes. It's not financial advice at all. But I do expect some sort of slowing down, at least in price, just until then. Potentially what could happen is obviously we can continue, especially, based on the monthly close. It's been a very, very aggressive candle to the upside. So we could very, very easily just expect for price to continue. However, essentially what I'm expecting on my personal sort of accounts and everything is this. When the halving event happens, it's quite expected, right? Especially with a lot of retail traders and everything, they're getting into the crypto industry and they're understanding it. I'm pretty much going to be expecting that price will at least give us some sort of consolidation / a little pullback. Again, I can't say, for example, that the pullback is going to be to areas down here, for example. When you just look at any of the consolidations that have happened after the halving event, it hasn't been significant at all. Just looking at price over here, pretty much where price started from, so down here, all the way up to here, it's probably about a 20% decrease, 25% decrease. Let's just look at the next one as well. As you can see over here, halving event happened, and essentially price just consolidated a bit. So again, another, maybe like 15-20% on that little leg over there. So just looking at what we've seen in the past and what we've seen at the moment, as you can see over here, I'm not going to be expecting more than maybe a 20% down sort of pullback at all. Now, when we do look at the numbers, let's just put our little fib retracement just to understand. Let's put 0.2. So essentially, just based on where price can actually end up, especially for the end of the month, we could expect this kind of region. So potentially, and for me personally, the only type of areas that I would be looking at is between 40,000 all the way up to 50,000. Anywhere within this zone, that's where I'm really going to be accumulating more orders in terms of my sort of investments into crypto. Again, one thing we can look at is what happens with Bitcoin. It's also going to happen to some of the alt market as well. And usually what we can expect is this, and this is a general rule that I've learned. When Bitcoin is consolidating, that's when alt seasons start to happen as well. So pairs like, Ethereum, Solana, Cardano, any of these sort of major ones, and even the small shitcoins, as many people would call them, that's where they really start to accumulate as well. So essentially that's it. Coming into this next halving event, what I'm expecting is, if I'm looking at long-term views, I would be looking at something like this. Essentially for price to give us the halving event, let's just say we end up like this, consolidated maybe down to this kind of area. And then over the next 6 months, that's where price will be slow, just based on what we've seen recently. Again, this all could be completely different. There's so many more factors that are coming into this, where there's more worldwide usage. Banks are getting more on board with this, with the whole idea of Revolut, Monzo, and all these. You can invest literally straight into your crypto account with this. Some of the more traditional banks are still staying away from it, but I do expect a change from that as well. And then obviously from this point, we can expect some prices. So who knows? Maybe a 3x from price right now, maybe a 4x even. But essentially what we're really looking for is for price to exceed the levels that we've been seeing right now. So yeah, guys, that's pretty much going to be it in terms of my view on Bitcoin and the halving event and everything. I'm obviously preparing myself, getting everything in USDT in a way. So again, I can easily just transfer that into whichever coins I do look at. Again, my portfolio is going to be mixed. I'm looking at a 25% sort of safer option, 50% kind of medium risk, and then obviously potentially looking at 25% higher risk as well. And obviously that's just my personal opinion. Again, you guys can do whatever you want. Alright guys, that's going to be it for this video. Please, if you did like this, obviously comment down below if you want to see more on Bitcoin and the whole crypto industry in general. And apart from that, that's going to be it. And I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.